Happy Monday, everyone. Hopefully, everybody's having a great day. I just want to go ahead and touch a little bit about the subject that Marcy, who is going to be leading the subject, is going to be helping us with. And the topic is how to live a balanced life. So let's bring Marcy and bring Christine. Welcome.
Hello, hello, hello. I am so incredibly excited to talk about this today. There are a few things. I mean, I'm a very passionate person overall. Those who know me know that I tend to get passionate about the things I talk about. But there are three things that I get really, really passionate about because I think we've been fed a bunch of lies when it comes to these things. And I get a kick out of busting all of these misinterpretations and setting the record straight, right? Like one of them is this idea that we need to have confidence before we can do anything. That's a lie. We can talk about that some other time. The second one is that there is one right way to do things, and if you're not doing it that right way, you're not going to get where you want to go. That's a bunch of baloney. And again, we can talk about it some other time. But today, I want to specifically talk about this idea that there is such a thing as work life balance, right? And that is a lie that we've been fed. It's a myth, it doesn't exist. We're going to talk about some things that we get to keep in mind and that we get to work on in order to not feel like we're being pulled in a million different directions, right? Like I think that one of the things that we want when we talk about work life balance, imagine speaking work life balance, is that we want to feel like we are centered, like we're not pulled in a million different directions and overwhelmed by all these different things. And we also want to feel like we're not dropping the ball in any important area of our lives, right? And I think that that's where the idea of work life balance comes from. And it's a beautiful idea, but it really doesn't happen. I mean, the people out there that are saying that they have work life balance are the people who have the live in nanny, the live in cook, the live in housekeeper, and they only get to focus on the things that they want to do, and they have a team for everything else, right? And that's the goal, is to eventually get to that space, right? Once we are there, and once we have the living nanny, the living chef, the living housekeeper, the house manager, someone in our team to take care of all the administrative and all the, I mean, we can just hire Tori and hire Christine for our bookkeeping, right? But once we have all that in place, then we can maybe start thinking about what people sell us as work life balance. But the reality of it is that we are not going to achieve exact work life balance as we've been sold work life balance. Does that resonate with you guys?
Yes, absolutely.
Right? So it's this idea, and this is the best analogy that I've been able to come up with, right? How many of you like riding bikes? Maybe some of you. I don't really like riding bikes, but I did learn to ride a bike, right? And one of the things that I learned right away is that if you don't want to fall on your side and scrape every part of your body, you need to keep moving in order for the bike to stay balanced, right? If you just stand and lift your feet and you're not moving, what's going to happen with the bike? It's going to
You'll
topple
fall.
over,
Yeah.
right? So you either have to put a foot down or let yourself fall on the ground. And you're going to be leaning anyway to one side, right? So the only way to experience a sensation of balance in a bike is to be constantly moving and constantly pedaling, right? Like even the experts who do all the tricks, if you notice, they're constantly moving the pedals back and forth in order to remain balanced on the bike. So that's the best analogy I've ever been able to come up with this idea of living a balanced life, is that in order for you to experience a sense of balance, you have to keep moving. You have to keep pedaling. You have to keep taking action. Otherwise, something's going to topple in one direction or another, right? That is not to say that the pedaling has to be frantic and full of overwhelm, right? It doesn't have to be. It can be a leisurely stroll along the park with you pedaling leisurely and taking your sweet time and enjoying the breeze. And that's the aim. It's to get to that space where our balancing feels that way. But instead of thinking about having work life balance, the idea is to think about, okay, how can I be balancing? How can I be balancing, right? So there's the action behind it, there's the progress behind it, there's the continuity behind it, but there's never a stagnation or a standing still and also health. That makes sense? Yeah. So, what are some areas in your lives as entrepreneurs and parents and all these other roles that you play? What are some areas in your life that you feel completely?
Areas that we feel that competes with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I would always say the time with the family versus the time that you spend actually working,
Mm.
because um, people quote me a workaholic because I don't have an issue working Saturdays and Sundays.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is that I enjoy what I do. I really enjoy it, and my daughter's like, "Dad, you gotta stop and give me some time." That is one of the things that I would say that is always competing in my life.
Mm. What about you, Christine?
Yeah, I agree with John. I think that balance between wanting to get the things done for your business that you need to get done, and sometimes that does blow over into the weekend,
Mm-hmm.
and that freedom that you think you were getting when you became an entrepreneur, right? Wanting some of that higher level things that you see on Instagram and Facebook and all these other places of the leisure time that you may not necessarily have access to when you first start your business. So finding
Absolutely.
that happy medium, yeah.
I think that that is very common for most of us, right? Like as entrepreneurs and parents, most of us, or having a spouse or having some sort of family life. One of the main things, and I know for me at the beginning, and I've mentioned this before, I think, I struggled a lot with gaining traction in my business because one of my top values is family. Right. So, very often when I was staying up late doing stuff for my business, or I had to leave the house to go to a networking event, or I had to miss something related to my daughter's activities and I was doing business stuff, I felt like I was stealing from my family almost, right? Like I was stealing time away from my family in order to build this thing called business. And I felt like I was almost abandoning my family in order to work on my business. And that's one of the things that started me down this path of trying to understand what a balanced life really looks like and what balancing really entails, because I kept sabotaging my business because I felt in the back of my mind that I was abandoning my family to build my business, if that makes sense. So I kept hitting a wall, hitting a wall, hitting a wall, because the time I needed to spend in building my business, I felt somewhere in the back of my mind like, no, 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 this is wrong. I should be spending it with my kids, or I should be spending it with my husband, or I should. Right? So I'm trying to share my screen, but I think I opened what I want to share the wrong way. So I'm
Just click on
still,
present, and then when it says share screen,
yeah, it's just showing me the tabs on my window, not, and I have it open as a PDF document and I can't.
yeah, what you do
It's,
is you can go. Does it have any audio?
no, it's just an
No.
image.
Okay, then on the upper right hand side, you're gonna see a place that says entire screen,
Okay.
and then you should be able to see the screen itself.
Okay. So
Can
let
you?
me make sure that that's okay.
There
All
you go.
right. So I need to shift it over here so that you can see this. Can you see that?
I'm gonna go ahead and add it to the stage. Now it's on the stage. We can see your entire screen.
All right, awesome. So what you see in front of you is what I call the live compass. And this is one of the first realizations I had. And this is the full one. Like usually when I show it, I don't show all the little writing, but I'm going to explain it in a minute. But this is one of the things that I first started to understand when I looked at this idea of balancing my life, is that we all operate in 4 different quadrants, right? So you see the compass, but you see different letters. It's not north, south, east, and west. It's S, M, B, and C. The S stands for spirit, which is our level of creation, our level of imagination. The C is community, which is the support, the teams, the people that we rely on. The M is the mind, or the systems and the routines that we operate from. And then the B is the body, or the sustenance, is everything that has to do with your physical body, right? Now, if you look at a compass, and if you've ever worked with a compass, if you're moving in the direction of towards north, right? Or yeah, just let's say north to keep it simple. If you're heading north, that automatically by definition means that you're moving away from the south. Does that make sense? So if you are moving in one direction in the compass, that automatically means that you're moving in the opposite or moving away from the opposite direction. Same thing if you're heading east, that means you're moving away from the west. If you're moving west, you're moving away from the east, and so on and so forth, right? We all understand that. So in our life, we operate in 4 different quadrants, and it just so happened that for the most part, this isn't an exact thing, right? But for the most part, when we're moving or focusing in one direction, that automatically by definition means that we're taking attention away from the opposite direction, right? So if we're operating on building our body, building our sustenance in some way, that might mean that for the time being, we are not as focused on the community and support piece. If we're operating more on the mind side, then that might mean that we're not focused as much on the body side, for example, and so on and so forth. So you see that there are gradients throughout. There are things that fall more in one direction, but that could kind of intertwine with others. But as you move from the spirit to the community, you see things like imagination, contribution, relationships, teams. As you move from community to mind, you see things like communication, your resources, your habits, your vision, and your goals, and so on and so forth. So the reason I'm sharing this is for us to start understanding that depending on where our focus is at the time, and depending on how we are leading ourselves, how we're talking to ourselves, how we're tapping into our values, anytime that we're moving in one direction, that automatically means that we're moving away from another direction, right? So that's important to understand because we cannot be moving in all 4 directions at the same time, right? That is impossible. It's not doable. So when we start understanding that that's just the way we operate as human beings, then we start giving ourselves a little bit more space and a little bit more grace to understand that we have to pick a focus. Does that make sense? And
Yes.
once we pick a focus, what we are doing is we're saying yes to one thing while temporarily shifting the focus away from the other things for the time being. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. As long as we are aware of the fact that while I'm focusing on this, I'm taking attention away from this other area. And therefore, at some point, I'm going to have to shift the focus. Right?
Yep.
Have you had moments when you're just focusing on one thing?
Yeah.
Like I think Christine
Sunday.
had this. What?
Sunday.
Yeah.
Sunday. Yeah, right? Christine had this experience of going with her son, and she was.
It's a season. I say sometimes it's a season, right? You're as you are again. We're building our businesses. We're in this season of building, and that may mean picking and choosing events that you may not want. You may not be able to attend that you would normally would attend, or spending time with your family. That may have to be shifted in certain ways, and it's difficult. It's difficult. Yeah.
Yep.
What about you, Johnny?
Yeah, with me, I mean, this Sunday I had to help my daughter, and I had a lot of things to do this Sunday for business. But my daughter is like, "Dad, you haven't spent any time with me this week." So yeah, like Christine said, it's about picking and choosing. It's the season sometimes.
Yeah. Now, when we go into this area of understanding that sometimes it's about picking and choosing, then we go into the other element to consider, and that is priorities. And how do we establish those priorities, right? Because that is one of the key things to keep in mind when we're trying to achieve that balance in our life, is that if we have more than 3 priorities, then we don't really have any priorities. So we have to start thinking about what are those top 1, 2, top 3 things that are the center of what I do, that attach to my values and my why, that attach to my vision, and that can help propel me forward, that I'm actually going to divide my focus into, right? And we'll talk more about those priorities when we come back.
Are you ready to meet the most important person in your life? Are you ready to have the date with yourself? How about learning what you're all about and what are your heart desires? For that, I invite you for my interactive workshop, Meet and Greet Your True Self, where you tap into your potential and understand what exactly you would like to create in your life.
Hi, I'm Kara Jean of Taking Care of Business. And what I know and what we do is we support you where you are with what you need. Because if you take care of you, then it's easier to take care of your people, and they're going to take care of your business. If that sounds interesting, come check us out at www.takingcareofbusiness.com.
Do you want to learn how to dance salsa and bachata? Well, now's your chance. We have 2 locations in Lake Worth and Commercial Boulevard in Florida. The first class is complimentary. All you have to do is sign up now.
Can I just tell you how much I love those? They were good. They were great. Awesome. So yeah, let's talk about priorities then, shall we? So when we have clear priorities, that is the first step towards balancing our lives. And here's why. When you have a million competing priorities, you don't know how to allocate your resources properly, right? And I always say that we have 4 main resources: time, talent, treasures, and teams, right? So the time, we know that's clear. Your talent is your skills or your abilities, what you're able to do, your zone of genius. Your treasures is your monetary resources. And then your teams are your community, the people around you, the people that serve you, either working with you, your family, whatever, right? So when you are competing, when you have a million different priorities competing for those resources, then it becomes very limited. It becomes very disseminated, right? It becomes almost watered down. And you find yourself lacking resources. You find yourself lacking the energy. You find yourself not having enough time for anything. You find yourself out of balance, and you find yourself like you're pulled in a million different directions and overwhelmed, right? So the very first thing to do is to narrow down what are your true priorities right now. Now, one of the things that I find people struggle with when it comes to any decision, but especially decisions like purpose and priority and all these things that we mentally struggle with, is that they feel very finite, right? Like we tend to think, okay, if I set these priorities and these are my priorities, then what happens with everything else? What happens with everything else is that it's still there, right? It's just, we know that there are 2 or 3 things, and this is scientifically proven, it's backed by psychology, it's been shown time and time again. When we have too many things that we're trying to focus on, we end up not focusing on anything. And the reality is that 80% of our results come from what? 20% of what we do.
Overactive, yeah.
Right? So when we find those 2 or 3 needle movers, those 2 or 3 priorities that are really going to put us in a space where everything else kind of falls into place. It's like having those dominoes, you know, when you line up the dominoes and you hit one and then all of them topple over. It's kind of like that. When you find the right priorities, you will find that everything else starts falling into place almost miraculously, almost effortlessly, because you are attending properly with the right amount of energy, with the proper allocation of resources to the things that really matter, right? So how do you start deciding on those priorities? How do you start figuring out what things really get to be in those 2 or 3 things that are at the top? That is probably the next question, right?
That is the big question.
And it becomes sometimes daunting because we are so used to operating under the weight of so many competing priorities, right? Like we have so many things that we allow space. But the first thing I would say is sit down with a journal or a notebook or a piece of paper and write down all the things that are important to you. Like give yourself a timer. I'm a big believer in timers. If you don't put a timer, you're either going to stop too quickly or go too long, right? So set a timer for 3 minutes. You don't need more than 3 minutes for this. And in 3 minutes, write down everything that comes to mind that is important to you, right? And then give yourself some space, because that's the other mistake we make. We write things down and then we run right away. We want to disseminate it and dissect it. You need space. You need to give your brain a minute to decompress and to let go of all that stuff. And then you come back and look at it. I guarantee the first thing you're going to notice is that a bunch of those things go together into one thing. That is the first thing you're going to notice. Like, for example, when I did mine the last time I did it, I had my husband, I had each of my daughters independently. I had my mom that had just moved away. I had siblings on there. I had nieces and nephews on there. That's all family, right? Mm-hmm. I had my income. I had my next project. That's all business, right? So when I started to look at it and really dissect it and look for patterns, I realized that a lot of the things that I had looked at previously as separate entities all fell into one priority, right? And so I was able to start consolidating a lot of those things into one category that became the priority, if that makes sense. So that is the first thing you're going to notice, is that, okay, these things all come together. This is all family, this is all business, this is all growth, right? Those are my three right now. So business, family, growth. And when I mean growth, I mean spiritual and intellectually, not business, right? So separate from that. So then I started to look at, okay, based on what I'm seeing there, what is it that I'm looking at that honestly could wait for later? Or that honestly, it's not my priority. It's somebody else's priority that I took on. Or what is on there that honestly, I just don't want to do it. Right? Because when we're honest with ourselves, a lot of our priorities are not ours. We take on from other people or from other shoulds and coulds and woulds, or from the environment or the expectations or whatever else is out there, and we don't really realize that they're not even our own. So when we start filtering and we start looking at all these things, guess what you get to do with any priority that is not strictly yours?
You tend to either disregard it, put it down.
What did you say, Christine?
To take it off the list or shift it goes to the bottom of the priority list.
Mm-hmm. Yep. You either eliminate it, delegate it, or archive it. You eliminate it, delegate it, or archive it. If it's not your priority in the first place, and believe it or not, when you do this exercise, you're going to see that there's a lot on there that isn't really yours, right? And if it's not yours to begin with, whoever put it on you, you can put it back on them, right? That's delegated. So if somebody really, like, I'll give you a really silly example. I hate doing dishes. I really do. Don't like it. Not my priority. I think that whoever invented the dishwasher deserves whatever, millions of dollars, right? So I don't like doing dishes. But the imposition or the idea that I needed to do dishes, not putting them in the dishwasher, was my husband's, not mine, right? So we had a conversation and I said, look, if I do the dishes, I'm putting them in the dishwasher. If you don't want the dishwasher to run, then you do the dishes. So guess what? Most of the time he does the dishes. And that's perfectly awesome. Something off my plate, right? Makes sense? So you can have the conversation, and not in a nasty way, but you can have the conversation with whoever came up with the idea that you needed to do this and say, look, let's be honest here. Let's just have an honest conversation about what I'm willing to do, what I'm not willing to do, what you're willing to do, what you're not willing to do. And let's see how we can come up with something that works for this, because I'm not willing to do this, right? And you can have the conversation around it and delegate it back to the person, or find someone else to delegate it to, right? Oftentimes you can just eliminate it. It's not going to hurt anything if you don't take care of that particular quote unquote priority or that particular task, right? Or you can archive it and save it for later. You can look at it later when you take care of all these other things. You can have it somewhere waiting for you, but you don't have to take care of it right away. So when you look at your list of things and you find things that are not necessarily you, that did not come from you, that you are not the one who decided this is a priority, one of those three things, eliminate it, delegate it, or archive it. It's fine. And give yourself permission to do those things, because that's the other thing. Very often we don't give ourselves permission. We see it, but we're like, but, right? So give yourself permission to let it go, right? What are you thinking, Christine? I see you processing.
No, I love the idea of that. Like, I don't like to do housework. I hate to clean. It's just one of those things. Like, I don't want to do that, and I need to figure out how to take that off of my list. Okay. And even when you take things off your list, my question is, how do I not worry about the thing that I have now taken off my list? I know you're going to get to that, but that's my question. How do you not feel guilty? How do I deal with that end of it?
Okay, we're going to take care of that in a minute, but let me just address this for 1 second. Just looking at it from a financial perspective, right? Just from numbers, which is your thing, just from black line or red line. However long it takes you to clean your house, how much money can you potentially make during that time? It covers the cost of hiring someone.
Yes.
So just bottom line numbers, it is more cost effective for you to hire someone to clean your house and you spend that time focused on money making activities than it is for you to take the time away from making money to go clean the house, which is someone else's zone of genius anyway. My mom cleaned houses for a long time, and she didn't do it just because she had to. She did it because she was awesome at it, and she felt pride in it, and she loved doing it. She loved the feeling of helping people do that, right? So you're allowing someone else to be in their zone of genius, right?
Yes,
which taps a little bit into how you stop feeling guilty, but we will talk more about that in a minute. Right? So now that you have consolidated what can be consolidated, identified the things that can be eliminated, delegated, or archived, you are probably at a much more manageable list. Now it's decision time, right? Anything that is left on that list is worth your attention. But which are the things that are going to get you further faster, or that are going to fill your soul faster? I like to use both filters, right? Not just the advancement, but also the growth, the internal growth, right? So when you look at what's left on that paper, what are, again, the 2 or 3 things that are going to help you get further faster or grow faster in your inner self, in who you get to be? And then you just pick 2 or 3, knowing that the ones that you don't pick are probably going to, the rising tide raises all boats, right? So they're going to elevate with you as you put your focus more on the things that are really the most important to you. Everything else, it's incredible how that works. Everything else will find a way to bubble up to the surface as well. And if it doesn't, then there's another way to handle it. And it's just a matter of getting creative about it, right? It's just a matter of trusting that if it's important enough, it's going to rise with the rest. And if it's not, then we can get creative around it and figure a way to manage it, right? So for example, going again to mine, and I don't like to hone in too much on mine because I don't like feeding people ideas. I want you to do your own and find your own, right? But for me, it's family, business, and growth. That's where I get to focus on. And once I work on those 3 priorities and everything that those entail, then I know that anything else that might be out there is going to follow suit. It's going to follow me. It's going to get there. Like if I'm thinking about finances, if I work on my business and I work on my growth, guess what? My finances are good. If I'm thinking about contribution, if I'm working on my growth and I'm working on my family and my business is service-based, guess what? I'm going to contribute, right? So there's a lot of things that go hand in hand, that once you're working on your priorities, they will follow suit. And therefore, there's no need to fret about it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Christine, what are you thinking? Yes? All right.
No,
cool.
it absolutely makes sense. It makes sense.
Awesome. So then what happens is Now that we know that we are working to be balancing as opposed to being completely balanced, one of the wheels is our priorities. And we already established that this is how we're going to figure out our priorities. We're going to do this exercise of being self-aware and sorting and filtering, right? The other wheel in your bicycle is boundaries. And we don't like talking about boundaries because we feel like boundaries is like cutting off a limb, right? For a lot of us, when we talk about boundaries, it's like, painful. Johnny, what are you thinking? I see your head.
I agree with you. There's a lot of people, including me. I cannot hide that. There's certain times that when we have to start, although I dread it, I have learned the hard way that I have to talk about it. It's one of the things that it had to happen to me so many times for me to take action.
And I think unfortunately that's the way most of us operate, right? I don't know where we got this notion or this idea that boundaries are limiting, right? Like we tend to think of boundaries as something that limits us in some way, or as something that could be offensive or that could be harmful to the other people in our lives. Here's the way I like to think about boundaries. Boundaries are like protective fences we put around our houses, right? If we live in a land, right? When I lived in Puerto Rico, we had an acre of land. And one of the very first things we did was put protective fencing around it, right? And there's two reasons why we put protective fencing that work together. We put protective fencing up to keep the bad things out and to keep the good things in, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we understand that that's the job of boundaries, then we start opening up a little bit more to the idea that we should welcome effective boundaries, right? Because our boundaries, again, help to keep the bad stuff out, but they also help to keep the good stuff in. So for example, if I have clear boundaries around the time with my daughters, they understand that while I might not be available at the drop of a hat anytime they need me, they can look forward to the hour and a half that I set aside for them every evening that is non-negotiable, that it's only theirs, right? So they know that even if I can't give them my full undivided attention right now because I'm working, I'm on this live with you guys, I'm doing this thing, they know that at 7:00 tonight, I drop anything and everything that is not them, and we sit until 8:30 and do nothing but spend time with each other, right? So when we have clear boundaries, that allows the people in our life to understand that there's a space that's exclusively theirs, where all the good thing is going to go to them, right? It allows us to spend time in our business without guilt, because we know that while our bicycle might be facing in the direction of business right now, I have already blocked a set of time when my trajectory is going to be going towards family, right?
Yes.
So I know that my travel goes both ways, and it's already established, it's already determined, right? Plus, the other thing it does is it allows you to focus on what's fully important at that time without too many interruptions, without too many distractions. Because I know you've probably seen the statistic that once you're distracted in your work, it takes you an average of 20 minutes to get back into full focus.
If not more.
If not more.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So when we have clear boundaries, we are protecting all our spaces. And we're allowing the good to stay in and the not good to stay out, right? So then the question becomes, how do I establish clear boundaries? How do I teach the people around me that these are the boundaries? Well, the reality of it is that whatever you permit persists. Whatever you permit persists, right? So the very first thing in boundaries is having the important conversations with the important people in your life, right? Like I communicate with my husband and my kids every morning. These are the times when I have meetings. Do not call me during these times. If you do, you're going to have to wait for my response, right? I communicate with them. This is the time that we're going to be spending together. This is the time that I'm going to be working. And I make it clear to them that they need to treat my entrepreneurial endeavors the same way they would treat if I had a 9-to-5 job, right? So we've had these conversations, yes? But then the other thing about it is if I have the conversations, but then every time they call me within my work hours, I answer and I drop everything else, what am I permitting? I'm permitting the interruptions. And people follow what you do, not what you say, right? So if I drop everything and I answer the phone every time they call, what I'm teaching them is I'm saying that these are my boundaries, but they're really not.
They can change, yes.
Right? They're just malleable markers that go and come. They're very flexible. They're like rubber bands. It's okay. But if I stick to it and I put my phone on airplane mode, or I do, and I know that as parents, we're always worried about emergencies and all these things. You can silence your phone and look at it from time to time. If it's an emergency, you can teach them how to get a hold of you. Like they can use, if you're on the computer, they can probably use WhatsApp or something that rings in your computer or whatever, and they can get to you that way. But teach them what a true emergency is, right? If they're like, I want $2 for popsicles at the end of the day, that's not an emergency.
Yes.
And teach them those things and have those conversations, but also stick to your guns. Stick to what your boundaries are that you have set, and show them by your actions, by not permitting certain things, that those are your boundaries. They will get used to it. Some of them might get a little upset at first, but they'll get used to it. Thoughts? Yeah, water.
So far, very valuable information because, one, I love the way that you put it. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Christine.
Yeah. No.
I think she wants you to finish, Jenny.
Okay. No, what I was going to say is that I love the way that you put the idea of figuring out what is important for us with the dishes and boundaries, because although they seem like a very simple thing to do, they're not as simple. Because as business owners, we want to make sure that we take care of our family, we take care of our clients, we take care of our employees, and we tend to be the last ones taking care of ourselves, and then our mental sanity is not the best.
Nope. Christine, what were you going to say, honey?
I was going to say that I think, how do you translate that for clients? Because I personally, that's where our people who are your friends become your clients, and explaining to them that, and I've had to do it a few times, and I feel like it sounds harsh, where as a friend, if you're texting me at 7 or 8 o'clock at night, that's fine. But when you become my client and you're asking me client questions at 7 or 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock at night, those are not questions that I'm answering. Like, I'm not answering those types of messages, or even if they weren't your friend before. But you have clients who think that Sunday afternoon they should be reaching out to you and you should get a response. But for me, Sundays are a non-negotiable day for anyone. I'm not answering anyone's text messages, not talking to anyone. I have what it is I do. It's family. And do I work on Sunday? Absolutely. But it doesn't mean I'm talking to clients. And how do you communicate that to them in a way
just like that
for them?
Yeah, just like that, actually. You should, as a business, have business hours, right? And as business owners, we get to establish that. And entrepreneurs, we tend to not want to think of ourselves as business owners because of the stigma that a business owner is an employee that works for himself, right? Like this idea that we don't want to do that. But yeah, we are business owners. So we get to have business hours, and we get to explain that and establish that with our clients the same way that if you were a brick and mortar, it would be printed on your door, right? It would say right there, these are my working hours. So you establish in your initial contact, if it's a new client, or in the conversations following that, right? My hours for doing business are Monday through Friday, whatever that might be, right? These are my hours. And yes, you do work outside of those hours, but they don't need to know that, right? And then you get to, like I said, what you permit persists, right? So if they reach out to you with a business question outside of those hours, you're perfectly in your right to not answer. The second you answer, you're in trouble, right? So you don't answer those messages that are business related, that are outside of business hours. And chances are, especially if they're friends, they're going to be like, hey, you didn't answer my text. And you go, hey, do you want me to bill you? Right? So you get to tell them, right, that you're working within your business hours. And if they want access for business stuff outside of business hours, they get to pay for that additional access. The second you say, I'm going to send you a bill for X amount of money, which is my rate per hour, and you used me for 2 hours outside of, they're going to stop. Or they're going to pay you, which might be a win-win. But
exactly. Okay, fair
right?
enough.
But no, the thing is, we're afraid of offending people. But in the process, what we do, and this speaks to your previous question, right? Very often, we are worried about priorities and boundaries because we're afraid of offending or disappointing people in our lives, whether it be family, whether it be clients, whether it be partners, whatever that may be. But the reality of it is that the more we take on outside of what we are comfortable with, or outside of what we really are meant to be doing, the more we're overloading ourselves. And eventually what's going to happen is we're going to let everybody down because we're going to burn out or shut down, right? So the way to think about it is doing this now is a preemptive measure, a preventive measure even, to keep me from getting to the space of burnout where I can then not take care of anybody or anything. So if I want to make sure that I'm providing my optimal self to everybody around me, I get to start by protecting and preserving myself. It's like, and I know it's cliche, but it's like putting your air mask on first in the airplane before helping anybody else. If you're about to pass out, you can't help anybody. If you're about to explode and burn out, you can't support anybody, right? So again, one of the key things that I always promote is being really aware of where you're at, being really honest with yourself, and then having those conversations with the key people in your life so that they can understand this is where this is coming from. And sometimes those conversations can be a little bit uncomfortable, right? But there are ways to have those conversations, and that's something that we can tap into in some other chat, right? How do we handle those difficult, crucial conversations? But for the most part, if you are in conviction that what you're doing is the right thing to do for everybody, that conviction will communicate and you will enroll them in whatever it is that you're trying to do. Ed Milet says it best. He says people don't need to believe what you're saying, they need to believe that you believe it, right? So when you are in full conviction that this is the best thing to do, and you sit down and have a conversation, anybody who has any common sense is going to understand that you mean well by doing this, and that you are operating from a great intention, and that your desire is to do what's best for everybody. Now, the first person you need to convince, it's you, right? And that goes to the guilt and the shame that especially as parents, we feel so often, right? So how does setting boundaries, setting priorities, and working to live a more balancing life support and help those people that you feel guilty about, right? And that's the question is, okay, if you're establishing clear priorities and you have clear boundaries, like I said with my daughters, for example, I don't feel guilty about not spending time with them during the day, even if they are off of school. You know, that used to be really hard for me when they had a day off and I wanted to work and they were here and I was like, they understand that if I have business to do, these are my business hours. I'm at work, but they know that they can look forward to the time that's just theirs. And the only way I can give them that is because they give me the time to work first, right? So it's a give and take. It's a synchronicity of intention. It's we all want to have the best of each other. You want a mom that's sane. You want a dad that's whole. You want a family that's put together. So the way this happens is by supporting each other in the things that we're doing. And for me, that means giving me the space to do this right now. Thoughts? Did that answer your concern, Christine?
Yeah, it does. And I think it's nice for, well, my children aren't children anymore, right? They're 27 and 23, but there's still those moments when they still want your attention. But I remember when they were kids, they knew certain times were already dedicated to them, and it made no difference to me if the world was on fire. I would be exactly where I said I would be for you. I would always show up when I said I was going to show up if it was something consistent. So having that consistency, because I am a creature of habit. I like consistency, and I'm sure that makes other people feel safe if they know that I will show up, this time every evening. That's when we'll be there. I'll have to try that with my husband.
There you go.
Yeah, I'll have to try that.
You should, and it will work as long as you're convicted that that's what needs to happen, right? He will see it, he will sense it, and he will support it. I know I was terrified when I went to tell my husband that I wanted to quit my teaching job because it was a considerable chunk of money that I was promising to replace with this other thing that was not promised, right? It wasn't a check every 15 days. So, right. But he saw the conviction in me. And once he saw that I was convicted, he didn't fuss, he didn't fight, he didn't argue. He was like, okay, this is what we get to do right now. And he's been so supportive. But I had to have the conviction first. And that's the way it operates in all of these things, right?
Yes.
Yes? How are we doing? And now the last thing I will say in this whole idea of balancing is human beings are so complex and human beings are so hard to understand. And we tend to operate in dichotomies. Tony Robbins talks about this all the time. We have 6 basic needs and they compete with each other. And like we have a need for certainty, but we also have a need for variety. Okay, how do those two things work together? We have a need for significance, which means I'm important, I'm the center of the world, I'm unique, but then we also have a need to connect with other people and feel like we're like other people. We have a need for growth, which means I'm working on my inner self and I'm, again, centered on me. But then I also have a need for contribution, which means I'm focusing on everybody else, right? So we operate in these dichotomies. So anytime we're trying to feel like we're 100% fully balanced, what is actually going to happen is we're going to feel like we are not covering one of our basic needs. So we need to stop putting this pressure on ourselves to create an equal balance and start understanding that the only thing we can do is operate in this balancing motion that keeps us moving in one direction for a little bit, in another direction for another little bit, making sure that we're aware of where our attention gets to be so that nothing gets completely dropped, right? But also understanding that we cannot spend the same amount of energy, the same amount of time, the same amount of resources on everything in our lives at the same time. It's impossible, right? So we get to set these priorities. We get to move in one direction for a little bit and then turn around and face the other direction and keep doing this movement around the compass so that we move in all the different directions that we need to move in. And in the end, we experience a sense of being in balance, even though we're not fully 100% balanced. You're so quiet.
No, the thing is that everything that you're saying makes absolute sense.
Good. So what I do, what I help people do, is establish all of these markers and understand, first of all, what is really your calling, your ultimate vision, what you're really working on in your life, right? And then once that is clear, then we can start working on all the layers underneath, right? So what are your purposes right now? How do those purposes translate into your priorities at the moment? And how do you transfer those priorities into your daily, day-to-day activities? And how do you do this in a way where you can manage your emotions effectively, where you can stop all these negative things that come our way that translate into self-sabotage, right? And how do you keep yourself moving forward and lead yourself to the tomorrow that you're aspiring to without feeling like you're overloaded in your today, right? That's where self-leadership comes in. And so for anybody out there listening, anybody who has heard anything I've said today and thinks, you know what, I would love to work more on living a more balanced life, on moving myself towards success without feeling overloaded or overwhelmed, I am putting together a beta experience for my group coaching program right now. If you go to www.projectascend.me, you can get all the details on there. But I am only opening this up to about a dozen people. So act quick if you're interested, go check it out. It is at a heavily discounted rate from what the group program is going to be later on. But what we are going to do is I call it an extended 8-week program because we're coming into the holidays. So we're taking that into account. It's actually, we're going to be together for 10 weeks, but 2 of those weeks are holiday weeks. So we're going to have an optional Q&A during those 2 weeks. But the rest of the 8 weeks, we're going to be working together on, ASCEND is an acronym, right? So acknowledging your being aware of yourself, strengthening your vision, connection and communication, empowerment from within, nurturing your authenticity, and taking decisive leadership. So those are the things we're going to be working on during the 8 weeks. And it's going to be an experience that is going to allow you to finish 2023 in the strongest vein possible and be as ready as possible to welcome 2024 in. So again, www.projectascend.me.
Perfect. Again, when does it start?
We are going to start the first full week of November. So
Okay,
once
so-
we have all the people in, so you have 2 weeks left, but don't wait the 2 weeks because like I said, this is going to be a very intimate experience because it's a beta and we're going to be collecting data and getting feedback and doing a bunch of other things. You're going to have more access to me than the regular program would. So it's going to be a very intimate group. So if you're interested at all, go today, purchase your spot. There is a cost to it, but it's a highly discounted cost from what it will be in the future.
Mm-hmm. All right, don't miss out because this is something that is going to help you to get your mindset straight for the next year.
Yes, absolutely. Any last thoughts?
So far, great.
Right, so just
great direction, great direction, great information in trying to help us really discern and understand that the limits are good. It's good to have not limits. It's good to set boundaries because it makes you productive. It makes everyone else, and it keeps everyone accountable in the process. And it does provide this level of certainty, right? When people are aware of your boundaries as well. So, yeah, great information, and for yourself, you always give good information.
Oh, thank you. And for yourself too. I think that a lot of the times we struggle with this idea of lacking clarity, but it's because we're too divided. We're too split in too many different directions, right? But once we start understanding where our priorities truly lie, and we start discerning and disseminating this idea that, look, I can't be exactly the same for everybody all the time. It's just not going to happen. I just get to focus this way now and the other way later. Then we start releasing this tension and this pressure we put on ourselves to be everything to everybody, to be on all the time, to do all the things. And then we start putting ourselves in a space where we can be more productive because we're no longer overwhelmed. So it's good for all of us.
That is true. All right. So anything else you would like to add before we start the closing?
Just everybody remember that you are on this planet with a calling on your life that nobody else has exactly the same way you do. You are unique, you are special, you have something to bring that nobody else can bring. So whatever it is that is tugging at your heart, whatever it is that you're feeling you get to do it. And for assistance, again, reach out to one of us, reach out to me, go to projectascend.me, register, get the assistance and get the support, because you're often just one distinction, one understanding away from getting to where you want to be.
Yep, that is right. All righty. Christina, any last thoughts?
Oh, I have a workshop coming up. And
there we go.
If you are local, if you're in the area, at Boynton Beach area, Boynton Beach City Library has invited me to speak about business money mindset. So I will be there November the 16th at 4:30 to 5:30. And yeah, that's what we have coming up. It all ties together, right? Marcy talks a lot about having a positive mindset and literally getting our mind right so that we can move through the process of life and check all those boxes off for our business. And this is just one of the parts, so having a positive money mindset so you can grow your business and your life in general.
That is right. So remember to find Marcy's workshop and Christine's workshop. Just go to Empower Entrepreneurial Education or go directly to their websites and social media that will have all this information handy for all of you. And
Absolutely.
we're ready to go.
Thank you,
So,
everybody.
till next time, bye.